Put every spoiled carton in the compactor, Marcus, or hand me your keys and leave Riverside Market right now.
I will not destroy safe food while our neighbors sit in darkness. Lock me out, but I am not walking away.
The glass doors of Riverside Market slammed shut as Vivian Cross locked Marcus Hale outside in the rain. Behind her, powerless aisles vanished into shadow. Before him, 30 safe grocery cartons crowded the wet sidewalk. Marcus wore his rain-darkened stock clerk polo and gripped the Riverside List beside a cart of perishable food. He was 38, exhausted and furious. His 15-year-old son, Ethan, stood beside the last carton. Ethan expected a ride home and found his father choosing hungry neighbors over safety, work, and pride. Families emerged from dark apartments carrying candles. Ethan watched them gather beneath the awning, then looked at the locked doors. "Dad," he whispered, "she really locked you out." Marcus did not answer. He shifted the final carton away from the rain and scanned the handwritten names for the most urgent mark. Through the glass, Vivian walked toward the office with her phone held high, searching for a signal. 2 employees stayed inside, ashamed and silent. "It is temporary," Marcus said. It was the answer Marcus gave Ethan too often. Late rent, shut-off warnings, missed school events, every extra shift. He made a lie sound gentle when he thought worry was a burden his son should never carry. Ethan looked at the cartons, then at the locked doors. "You handed her your keys." "I know what I did." "Do you?" The question landed harder than the door had. Marcus turned away before his son could see it. Wind lifted the handwritten page. At its top were 2 words, Riverside List. Below them, 43 names carried red circles, suns, and apartment squares. To Vivian, it looked like inventory theft. To Ethan, like the thing his father always chose over dinner. Across the street, the old woman raised her candle and covered it with her palm 3 times. Light, dark, light, dark, light. Marcus saw it immediately. "Mrs. Alvarez," he said. "What about her?" Ethan asked. Her elevator stopped when the power went out. Red circle means she cannot manage the stairs alone. 3 flashes means she has less than 1 meal left. Ethan stared at the page. For the first time, he understood that the symbols were not inventory marks. They were people. Marcus pulled the first cart away from the door. Its front wheel squealed. "Help me move these under the awning," Vivian said. She called security. "Then we have until security arrives." That is not a plan. It is the beginning of one. Marcus arranged cold food by the ice chests, bread away from rain, and produce on cardboard. By Ethan's phone light, he checked seals and labels. Nothing branded faced the street. Hunger was private, and dignity mattered as much as dinner. The first person to cross the street was Aisha Carter, a nursing assistant in purple scrubs. She held the hands of 2 sleepy children. "Marcus, are you open?" she asked. "The store is closed." Her eyes moved to the food. "Then what is this?" Marcus almost said he had it handled. The words rose automatically. He swallowed them. "Food that has to reach people before morning," he said. "But I cannot do it alone." Ethan looked at him. That sentence was rarer than any confession. Aisha set a candle on the windowsill and tied her children's rain hoods. "Tell me where to stand." Mr. Bell arrived with his folding cart. Ruth Jenkins brought community center coolers and lanterns. Nia Patel, Riverside's youngest cashier, slipped out in her green apron. "I am off the clock," Nia announced. "You may be off the schedule permanently," Marcus told her. "So may you." For one breath, they both smiled. Then the market office door opened behind the glass, and Vivian's heels struck the tile. She unlocked the outer door only far enough to speak through a narrow gap. "Everyone step away from store property. Those goods belong to Riverside Market." "They were on the compactor pallet," Nia said. "You marked them for disposal. I marked them for review. You said dump everything before the district inspector sees the shrink." Vivian's eyes sharpened. "Nia, go back inside." Nia removed her apron and folded it over the door handle. "No." Marcus stepped between them. "Do not make this about her." "This is about you," Vivian said. "You moved inventory outside without authorization. You kept a private list of recipients. You have been running an unapproved distribution operation from my stockroom." The families on the sidewalk went quiet. Vivian pointed at the crumpled paper. "Hand me that list." Marcus closed his fist around it. "If it is innocent, why are you hiding it?" Because people had trusted him with what they hid from their own children. Mrs. Alvarez's diabetes, Mr. Bell-watering soup to stretch it, Aisha's 16-hour shifts, one woman's lonely meals. Their need is not your evidence, Marcus said, and store property is not your charity. Vivian locked the door again. The crowd murmured. Many had believed Riverside officially permitted the damaged food shelf. Marcus had never corrected them, telling himself secrecy protected the program. Now it exposed everyone who accepted help. Ethan lowered his voice. Tell them you paid for half of it. Not now. Why not now? Because then this becomes a story about me buying food. You did buy food. You skipped lunch for months. Ethan, you want dignity for everybody except yourself. Marcus looked at his son, but Ethan's face had already closed. At the far end of the block, a pair of headlights turned through the rain. A security vehicle. Vivian watched it approach from behind the glass. Marcus had perhaps 5 minutes. The old version of him would have pushed every cart and carried every consequence alone. The version that missed Ethan's debate final after promising to attend and answered 4 messages only. Something came up. Marcus laid the Riverside List on an overturned carton. Mrs. Jenkins, take the apartment numbers with squares. Those buildings have no working stairwell lights. Aisha, red circles are people who cannot come down. Mr. Bell, small sons mean there are children in the home. Nobody goes alone. Nobody leaves food at a door without hearing a voice. What do I do? Ethan asked. Marcus handed him the pencil. You check my work. It was not an apology. Not yet. But it was the first time Marcus had placed the list in anyone else's hands. The security vehicle stopped. Before its guard emerged, candles lit windows across the block. Darkness revealed an entire neighborhood waiting to be seen. The guard stepped out and surveyed the families, the food, the locked market, and Marcus without keys. Who is in charge here? He asked. Marcus opened his mouth. Ethan answered first. Nobody is. That is the point. 6 hours earlier, Marcus had been standing in Riverside Market's receiving room with a case of bruised apples in his arms and a promise already broken. At 3:45, Ethan's debate coach sent a photograph. Ethan at a lectern, certificate in hand, looking toward Marcus's empty chair. Marcus saved it without replying. A late delivery, a sick clerk, and Vivian's threat of abandonment kept him at work. Marcus had believed there would be another ceremony. He had believed Ethan would understand. He had believed providing for a child and being present for a child were the same thing. They were not. He placed the bruised apples on a low shelf near the receiving door. A yellow card above the shelf read, Community Hold. The card was homemade, the letters written by Marcus years ago. Beneath it sat bread with crushed corners, cans with torn paper labels, bananas spotted brown, and boxes of cereal dented but sealed. Nia came in carrying 2 bags of rice. Vivian wants these in disposal. The bags are sealed. One outer case split. Put them on hold. Nia hesitated. She removed the hold category from the morning sheet. Marcus stopped stacking apples. When? After the district call. Vivian had managed Riverside for 11 months, trying to make the struggling location efficient enough for promotion. She cut hours and moved the donation bin behind customer service, where people had to ask for it aloud. Marcus disliked her methods, but his first misjudgment was assuming ambition meant cruelty. He never asked what failure frightened her, or told her how much need surrounded the market. He continued the system quietly, treating secrecy as nobler than disagreement. Put the rice on hold, Marcus said again. Nia obeyed. The Riverside List began with Lena, Marcus's wife, who worked at the community center. She wrote down residents who stopped attending meals near month's end, not to shame them, but to remember who needed an extra plate. After her death, the list stayed in a drawer for a year. Marcus found it one night when Ethan was 8. There were 17 names and a note in Lena's handwriting. Ask twice. Proud people say no the first time. Marcus turned that note into a mission, then a hiding place. Helping the block made him feel close to Lena and spared him from sitting with Ethan's questions about death or his fear of raising a child alone. Over the years, Ethan learned not to compete with a knock at the door. At 4:30, Vivian entered the receiving room and removed the yellow community hold card. This ends today, she said. Marcus wiped his hands on his trousers. The food is safe. That is not the issue. It is the only issue if the other option is a compactor. District inventory shows unexplained shrink every Wednesday. I found apartment numbers in your locker. Tomorrow, an inspector decides whether this store keeps 52 employees or becomes a 12-person outlet. Marcus had not known about the inspector. Then show them the shelf, he said. Show them what this market does. An unofficial program run by a stock clerk who ignores chain policy? A neighborhood program. A liability. Her phone rang. The screen showed Mother. Vivian silenced it without answering. Throw out the hold items, Vivian ordered. All of them. Record the weight. Clean the shelf. Marcus should have refused openly. He should have asked for the owner, called the community center, or brought the program into the light while there was still time to choose carefully. Instead, he said, "Understood." Vivian left. Nia stared at him. "You are going to dump it?" Marcus looked at the shelf. "Get me clean cartons." That was his real mistake. Believing a good purpose made deception harmless. He packed the food, wrote times on the flaps, and planned to buy what he could and move the rest to Ruth's van. He told neither Vivian, Ethan, nor Ruth, who might have obtained permission. Marcus did what he always did. He made himself the only bridge and then complained about the wait. At 5:15, the lights flickered. Refrigeration motors coughed. Rain hammered the roof. A transformer flashed blue. Half the store went dark, and the registers froze with customers still waiting. Marcus moved immediately. He directed Nia to the front, sent another clerk to check the freezer doors, and rolled the packed cartons toward the coolest section of receiving. Vivian took command of the registers and began escorting customers outside. At 5:23, every light in Riverside Market died. For a few seconds there was complete darkness. Someone screamed. A glass jar broke. Then phone lights appeared, floating over the aisles like small moons. "Everybody stay where you are," Marcus called. "Employees will guide you to the front." He knew the floor blind. 12 steps to produce. Turn at the flower stand. Avoid aisle 6's loose tile. He found a crying boy, cleared an old man's path, and led customers outside. Outside, the whole block was black. Ethan arrived, soaked from the rain, 20 minutes later. His school backpack was under his hoodie. "The buses stopped," he said. "I walked from Eastview." Marcus pulled him close, felt him resist, then released him. "You saw the picture?" Ethan said. "I did. That was the final." "I know. Coach saved you a chair." "I am sorry." Ethan looked toward the workers carrying flashlights. "Are you leaving now?" Marcus should have said yes. He had already missed the event, but the powerless refrigerators, packed cartons, and crowd pulled at the part of him that felt useful in crisis. "Give me 30 minutes, he said. Ethan laughed once without humor. "There is always somebody who needs your next 30 minutes. Inside, Vivian called the staff to the receiving room. Her face was lit from below by a lantern. "The backup unit is failing," she said. "Move prepared food, dairy from open cases, and hold items to disposal. We need counts before morning." "Before morning?" Nia asked. "People are outside asking whether they can buy food with cash." "Registers are down. Doors stay locked." Marcus stepped forward. "We have sealed food that is safe now. Ruth has coolers at the community center. We can distribute before the temperature changes." "No. Then let me call Eleanor Price." At the owner's name, Vivian's expression hardened. "Mrs. Price is on the other side of the river. The main bridge is closed to vehicles. I am the manager in this building. And this building is in a neighborhood. Do not turn this into a performance." It became real when the lights went out. Vivian looked past him at the packed cartons. She understood at once that he had disobeyed the earlier order. "You prepared those." Marcus said nothing. "How long have you been diverting product?" "I have been keeping edible food out of a machine, using store labor and store space without authorization. I used my time." "Your name is on the time clock." The staff watched them. Ethan stood in the doorway, hearing every word. Vivian's fear of inspection met Marcus's fear of asking permission. She saw a reckless, secretive clerk. He saw a manager who valued numbers over people. Neither paused long enough to see the food had minutes, not hours. Vivian pointed toward the compactor pallet. "Put every carton in disposal." Marcus refused. She demanded his keys. He placed them in her palm. Before she could block receiving, Marcus rolled prepared carts onto the covered sidewalk, where cold rain would buy time. Nia, 2 customers, and Ethan helped. By the time security was called, 30 cartons stood outside. Vivian locked the glass doors. Now, 6 hours later, the same carts waited under the awning while the security guards studied the gathering crowd. Marcus expected him to order everyone away. Instead, the guard looked through the glass at Vivian and asked, "Did you mark this food for trash?" I marked it for controlled disposal, she answered through the door. So nobody purchased it? It remains store property. The guard turned to Marcus. Did you remove it? Yes. Ethan stepped closer. Dad, explain why. Marcus could have softened the truth. He could have made himself sound braver and Vivian sound worse. The neighbors were listening. So was his son. I removed it because it could feed people tonight, Marcus said. I also hid the size of our distribution shelf from management. I told myself secrecy protected everybody. It did not. It put Nia's job at risk, it gave Vivian reason to suspect theft, and it taught my son that I would rather carry a whole block than speak honestly to him. No one moved. The security guard lowered his radio slightly. Marcus continued. I will answer for that. But first, this food has to move. Mr. Bell tapped the handle of his folding cart. Then stop talking and give an old man a route. Laughter broke the tension, quiet but real. Ethan bent over the Riverside List. Near the bottom, he found a name he had never noticed before. Gloria Cross, Oak Terrace, apartment 4B. Beside it was a red circle and the note low salt. He glanced at Vivian through the glass, then back at the page. Dad, he said, who is Gloria Cross? Marcus scanned the line. A woman Mrs. Jenkins added 3 months ago. She never comes downstairs. Vivian, too far away to hear, lifted her phone again. The screen lit her face. Mother. This time, the call ended before she could silence it. The security guard introduced himself as Leonard Shaw. He was broad-shouldered, gray at the temples, and visibly unhappy to be deciding the fate of 30 cartons in the rain. Store policy says I secure the property until police arrive, Leonard said. How long? Ruth asked. Dispatch is overwhelmed. Maybe 20 minutes. Maybe 2 hours. Ruth opened one cooler and pressed her hand against a carton. Some of this has 20 minutes. Vivian unlocked the door again, this time keeping the chain across it. Mr. Shaw, move everyone beyond the property line. Marcus has admitted taking inventory. Leonard looked at the narrow strip of sidewalk between the storefront and the curb. Where exactly is the property line? Vivian pointed to a seam in the pavement. Marcus moved the cart 6 inches across the seam. Vivian could control the building, not make the neighborhood disappear. Ethan kept studying the list. Gloria Cross called your phone. Vivian's eyes flicked toward him. You do not know who called me. Her name is here. Marcus placed a hand over the page. Ethan, not like this. She is using the list against you. That does not give us permission to use it against her. Vivian heard that. For a moment, her anger loosened, replaced by something more frightened. Then the office phone began ringing through the dark store, and the expression vanished. Ruth led the first delivery team to Oak Terrace. Marcus wanted to follow. He knew every difficult entrance and reluctant resident. Ethan caught his sleeve. You told people their routes. Let them do it. Mrs. Alvarez needs someone on the landing. Aisha knows. Mr. Bell's knee. Nia is with him. Marcus stood under the awning with empty hands. It felt more dangerous than carrying 4 cartons alone. He watched the lanterns move away and forced himself not to follow. More neighbors gathered, some for food and some because rumors said a Riverside employee was stealing. They questioned the private list and free groceries. This was a real block, with suspicion, pride, fear, and resentment. Marcus climbed onto the curb so people could see him. This is not first come, first served, he said. The list marks homes at immediate risk. Seniors alone, children without another meal, people unable to use stairs. If you can wait, help someone who cannot. Who made you judge? Someone called. Marcus did not defend himself. I made the list. That was wrong. Tonight, every decision needs a resident, a worker, and someone receiving nothing. If they disagree, the carton stays. Aisha nodded. Nia raised a hand. Leonard, after a long pause, volunteered as the third person. The rules slowed them, then strengthened the work. Juice went to 6 children, soft fruit to the community kitchen, bread by household size. People who came to receive began loading carts. The list grew. Ethan wrote additions in the margins. But unlike Marcus, he asked each person to confirm the entry. He wrote names in full. He explained what each symbol meant. No secret code. No private burden. You are changing my system, Marcus said. I am making it a system other people can use. Marcus wanted to correct him. Instead, he said, good. At 11:30, Officer Maya Chen arrived on foot. Vivian showed her the receiving room, missing cartons, and sidewalk before Maya came outside. Mr. Hale? Mrs. Cross alleges unauthorized removal of store inventory, she said. That is accurate. Ethan stopped writing. She also alleges you intended to distribute it. Also accurate. Do you understand that good intent does not give you ownership? Yes. Will you return what remains if the owner instructs you to? Marcus looked at the cartons. Yes, might save his job and keep him out of a police car, but children were already eating. Returning food to a powerless store would waste their narrow chance. If the food is still safe and people need it, I will not put it back to be destroyed, he said. I will accept the consequence. Maya studied him. That is not the answer your son wanted. Marcus looked at Ethan. It is not, Ethan said, but it is honest. Maya asked Leonard to document the remaining cartons. She neither arrested Marcus nor authorized distribution. Inside, Vivian used the last charge on her phone to reach the district office. Before the battery died, she sent Eleanor one photograph of the waiting families and the blocked carts. The screen confirmed it was delivered. She returned to the door with a printed form from the manager's emergency binder. District confirms the goods must remain secured pending assessment, she said. Any further removal will be reported as deliberate theft. Nia read the form through the glass. It says refrigerated goods must be assessed. It does not say destroy everything. You are not trained to interpret it. Neither is darkness. Marcus raised a hand before the argument spread. No more hiding behind words. Vivian, come outside and touch the cartons. Tell these families which ones you believe should be saved. I will not participate in an unauthorized event. Then look at the windows. Across Riverside Avenue, candlelight marked waiting apartments. The blackout made need more visible than any spreadsheet. Vivian did not look. The Oak Terrace team returned at midnight. No one was trapped, but upper floors had no water pressure. Mrs. Alvarez shared her meal box. Ruth had not found Gloria Cross in 4B. Her door was unlocked, Ruth said quietly. Her cane was there. No sign of her. Vivian opened the chain before she realized she was doing it. What do you mean, no sign? Ruth looked at Ethan's list, then at Vivian. Are you family? Vivian stepped onto the sidewalk for the first time since locking Marcus out. She is my mother. The revelation did not excuse Vivian's order or Marcus's secrecy. It turned a name into a person for her, as the list always had for Marcus. She called me twice, Vivian said. I thought she was checking on the storm. She refuses help. Marcus remembered Lena's note. Ask twice. Where would she go? He asked. The basement laundry room during outages. She thinks it is safer because there are no windows. Oak Terrace basement floods. Vivian's face emptied of color. Marcus reached for a lantern. Ethan blocked him. You cannot run into another building alone. I know the basement, so tell us. Marcus looked at Leonard, Maya, Aisha, and Ruth. Going alone might cost more. He drew the basement map on a carton. Maya called the fire crew while Aisha, Ruth, and Vivian supplied details. Within minutes, a rescue team moved toward Oak Terrace. Marcus remained at the market. Staying was the hardest useful thing he had done all night. Vivian sat on an overturned crate, soaked and silent. Ethan offered her a bottle of water. She accepted it without looking up. Why was my mother on your father's list? She asked. Because somebody noticed her, Ethan said. Vivian flinched. At 12:40, Maya's radio crackled. Gloria had slipped in the laundry room but was conscious, cold, and bruised. The fire crew was bringing her up. Vivian covered her mouth. Marcus turned away, giving her the privacy he had defended for every name on the page. When she could speak, she said, Thank you. Thank Ruth, Marcus answered. She added the name. You remembered the basement. Remembering is not the same as rescuing. A team went. It was a lesson, he was saying to himself. Gloria's danger changed the crowd. Questioners began checking neighbors. Teenagers climbed stairwells. The laundromat opened storage for blankets, and a restaurant cook brought ice. The food became the block's shared responsibility. That did not solve the central conflict. Vivian still had authority over the remaining cartons. Maya still had a complaint to investigate. The district inspector was still expected after sunrise. Marcus was still unemployed. At 1:15, the rain became heavier. Water pushed under the awning. The line of carts had to move or the lower boxes would be ruined. Vivian stood. Bring them inside. Everyone looked at her. The vestibule is tile and cooler than the sidewalk, she said. The inner doors can remain locked. Mr. Shaw can count every item. Marcus watched her unlock the outer doors. He could have treated the change as surrender. Instead, He took one side of the first cart and nodded toward the other. Vivian gripped it. Together they rolled the food across the threshold. For the next hour, the vestibule became an open exchange point. Nobody entered the aisles. Leonard counted, Maya witnessed, Ethan kept the list, and Vivian separated questionable items under Ruth's judgment. At 2:30, the district inspector arrived unexpectedly in a raincoat, having walked from a hotel 3 blocks away. His name was Conrad Vale. Vivian straightened as though the lights had returned. Conrad surveyed the dark store and the organized crowd. "I came to evaluate shrink controls," he said. "Instead, I find inventory leaving through the front door." Vivian looked at Marcus. This was the moment when she could place every consequence on him. "The original removal was unauthorized," she said. "I ordered the hold, items disposed. Mr. Hale refused," Conrad wrote on his clipboard. Vivian continued, "I ignored neighborhood conditions because I feared the store would close. That fear did not make my order right." Conrad stopped writing. Marcus stepped forward. "And I operated the hold shelf without approval. I kept the list private and made the program depend on me. That was not sustainable or honest." "So both of you admit policy failures," Conrad said. "Yes," Marcus and Vivian answered. Conrad looked almost disappointed by the lack of blame. "All distribution stops until the owner arrives." He placed his clipboard on a cart and stood in front of the vestibule. The remaining food 12 cartons, enough to reach the last buildings, waited behind him. The block had been moving for hours. Now it stopped. Blue-gray light began touching the clouds beyond the river. Sunrise was approaching. Marcus checked the Riverside list. Every name was crossed through, except 5. Gloria Cross was one of them. The others were families in the far building where the elevators had failed. Ethan counted the cartons. "We have exactly enough." "If Vale releases them," Marcus said. "And if he does not?" Marcus looked at the people who trusted him, the manager finally telling truth, and his son with the pencil. Every choice cost something. Defy the inspector, wait while food spoiled, or walk away to protect pride. Then the market's elderly owner, Eleanor Price, appeared at the end of the block in rubber boots, pulling a folding wagon through the rain. Vivian's delivered photograph had brought her across the old pedestrian footbridge while the main bridge remained closed to vehicles. Conrad lifted his clipboard. Vivian stood. Marcus's stomach tightened. Eleanor did not ask who had broken policy. She looked at the candlelit windows, the wet families, and the 5 uncrossed names. "Show me the list," she said. Ethan carried the rain-soft Riverside list to Eleanor. Pencil marks crowded its margins. It was years of one man's memory trying to hold more lives than one person should hold alone. Conrad reached for it first. "This may be evidence of systematic inventory diversion." Eleanor kept her hand out. "The boy is offering it to me." Ethan placed the page in her palm. Eleanor, who had opened Riverside with her husband, knew Marcus as reliable and Vivian as a manager fighting for an unprofitable store. She knew nothing of the shelf, missed meals, or names. She read the first line aloud. "Mrs. Elena Alvarez, apartment 2C, red circle, 3 flashes." Mrs. Alvarez called from across the street. "That means I am stubborn and should not be trusted when I say I have eaten." The crowd laughed. Eleanor looked up. She read the next. "Arthur Bell, 1A, no salt when possible." Mr. Bell raised his folding cart. "Marcus noticed I was buying 1 can of soup every 3 days. He never asked why in front of other customers." Aisha Carter, 3 sons. Aisha placed her hands on her children's shoulders. 3 children then, 2 now. My niece went home to her mother last spring. Marcus forgot to erase a son. Ethan took the pencil. "I fixed it tonight." Names became voices. Neighbors correcting and taking ownership. Marcus had helped them, but they had watched Ethan, repaired his table, and sat with him after Lena died. The list was not a hero's ledger. It was a map of what the community already carried together. Eleanor reached Gloria Cross. Vivian stood very still. "Gloria Cross, Oak Terrace, apartment 4B, red circle, low salt," Eleanor read. An ambulance turned onto Riverside Avenue. Gloria sat inside under a blanket, bandaged and refusing the stretcher. She descended with Ruth's help. Vivian crossed the street at a run. "Mother." Gloria touched her daughter's cheek. "You finally answered." Vivian bowed her head. "I am sorry." "So am I. I said I was fine because I did not want you to worry." Marcus heard his own voice in hers. "Temporary. I have it handled. Do not worry." Gloria noticed the list in Eleanor's hands. That stock clerk sent a bag with Ruth every Thursday. He thought I did not know. I thought you did not accept help, Vivian said. I did not accept it for me. I told myself I was saving the bread for a neighbor. Which neighbor? Gloria glanced toward Mrs. Alvarez. A proud woman does not betray another proud woman. Again, laughter moved through the block, softer this time. Vivian turned to Marcus. Her face held gratitude, shame, and anger at herself in equal measure. I accused you of using my mother's name. You did not know it was hers. I should have known she needed someone. So should I have known what Ethan needed yesterday. They looked toward Ethan. Neither was allowed to escape into gratitude. Besides several names, Eleanor found initials marking contributors when the shelf was empty. Belle's garden vegetables, Ruth's meals, Aisha's bulk rice, Nia's employee coupons. And, Eleanor asked. Ethan answered, My father. It means he bought the food. Marcus's jaw tightened. How often? Eleanor asked. Too often, Ethan said. Enough that our electric bill is late. Marcus felt every eye turned toward him. This was the humiliation he had tried to prevent by hiding. That was not noble, he said. I promised my son our home would be secure, then broke that promise, trying to secure everyone else's. I missed his debate final and used helping to avoid grief and asking for help. Ethan did not rescue him from the truth. I am proud of what he did tonight, Ethan said. I am also angry. Both things are true. Eleanor folded the page carefully. Then any solution that turns Marcus into a lone savior will repeat the same harm, she faced Conrad. How many of the remaining goods are safe for immediate distribution? He shifted his clipboard. That determination requires Ruth? Ruth had kept time, seals, and temperatures in plain sight, with Leonard and Maya watching. 12 cartons are safe now. They should move within 30 minutes. Eleanor pointed at the carts. Release them. Conrad objected. Mrs. Price, the district may classify this as unauthorized loss. Then classify it under my authority as emergency community distribution. I own the goods. I accept the loss. Ownership changed the immediate question, but the night's human evidence changed what Eleanor chose to do with it. Conrad removed himself from the cart. The block moved again. Marcus reached for the first handle, then stopped. Ethan, assign the routes. Ethan checked the 5 names. He paired volunteers. He sent Aisha with a family that needed infant formula. He sent Leonard and 2 teenagers to the upper floors. He gave Nia the carton for Gloria and Mrs. Alvarez. What is left? Marcus asked. Ethan looked into the final box. Bread, oatmeal, apples, and the last shelf-stable milk. Who gets it? The Dawson family in Riverside Towers. 4 children. Their father is at the emergency clinic with their mother. Marcus dropped urgently to one knee and pressed the carton toward Ethan. Ethan leaned forward and took its weight with both hands. Marcus checked the final line as carts waited along the dark storefront and blue dawn reflected on wet pavement. For one quiet second, the whole night became the image the title had promised. The locked-out stock clerk, his handwritten list, his son, and enough organized care to feed an entire block by sunrise. You are coming with me, Ethan said. I thought you were assigning routes. I assigned you. Marcus smiled. Then lead. They pushed the final cart toward Riverside Towers together. On the 15-minute route, Ethan said nothing about the debate. Marcus waited until they had delivered the carton to the Dawson apartment. On the stairwell landing, Marcus stopped. I cannot give you back yesterday, he said. No. I kept telling myself I was working for you. Sometimes you were. Sometimes I was hiding. Ethan sat on the step. Mom left a hole. You filled it with everybody else's emergencies. Marcus sat beside him. The concrete was cold through his trousers. I did not know how to sit near the hole, he admitted. Neither did I. For years, Marcus had believed a father should have answers before speaking. On that stairwell, he finally gave his son something more useful. I miss her, he said. Ethan's eyes filled. Me too. They stayed there until the emergency lamp blinked once and died. Then they descended by the light of Ethan's phone, shoulder to shoulder. When they returned, every name was crossed through. Volunteers brought back empty carts. Mrs. Alvarez stood with Aisha. Gloria sat beside Vivian, and Mr. Bell poured camp stove coffee. Eleanor stood inside the vestibule with Nia and Conrad. The market was still dark, but the doors were open. There will be consequences, Eleanor told the assembled workers. Honesty requires that too. She suspended Vivian from management duties pending a full review. Vivian accepted without argument. I gave an order that treated edible food as a threat and people as a statistic, Vivian said. I was protecting a position I had not earned the right to keep. Eleanor also told Marcus that operating a hidden shelf could not continue. I understand, Marcus said. Do you? Because I am not closing it. Eleanor unfolded the Riverside List on the counter. We will create a documented community pantry with the center, the residents, and store staff. No hidden inventory, no single keeper of names, no child losing his father to every emergency. She offered Marcus the role of paid community stock coordinator. The crowd began applauding, but Marcus raised his hand. Not unless the job has fixed hours, another coordinator, and a rule that no private household information belongs to one employee, Ethan added, and he gets debate nights off. Eleanor looked at Marcus. Is he always part of contract negotiations? From now on. Ruth became second coordinator. A resident committee would update the list openly and let households choose what they shared. Nia would be paid, Leonard would report every witness, Maya closed the theft complaint after Eleanor accepted responsibility, while employment issues remained. The outcome erased nothing. Riverside still faced financial trouble and district review. Marcus had a late electric bill, and Vivian had to face ignoring her mother and letting fear harden into control. But the block had seen what it could do. Conrad saw 52 employees organize safe crisis distribution, and residents document routes and return carts. The store's value included trust, so he recommended a 90-day community pilot instead of conversion. The pilot required accounting, safety training, public rules, and shared oversight. Marcus welcomed every safeguard against another private system. At 7:10, power returned. The Riverside Market sign flashed red, then steadied. Refrigerators hummed. Register screens woke. Apartment windows brightened one by one until the candles looked small. Nobody cheered for the electricity at first. They cheered when Mrs. Alvarez blew out her candle and raised both hands from across the street. Vivian walked her mother home. Before leaving, she stopped beside Marcus. I do not expect forgiveness because I became afraid, she said. Good, she almost smiled, but I will tell the review exactly what I ordered. That is where repair starts, Gloria called from the curb. Vivian, ask twice. Proud daughters say they are coming the first time. Vivian laughed through tears and followed her. Eleanor found bread and apples for Marcus and Ethan. On the loading dock, Marcus did not scan for another emergency. He left the list with Ruth. Ethan took his debate certificate from his backpack. The rain had curled one edge. My coach said I can present the final argument again at Monday assembly, he said. What time? 6. Marcus took a blank receipt from his pocket and wrote, Monday, 6, Ethan, across it. He did not hide it in his wallet. He pinned it to the front of the Riverside List where everyone could see. If I try to take an extra shift, Marcus said, what happens? The committee rejects your application. Strict system. Transparent system. Marcus bit into an apple. Your mother would like it. Ethan looked toward the waking block. She would make you add one more name. Whose? Ethan wrote Marcus Hale at the bottom of the page. Beside it, he drew a red circle. Someone who says he is fine the first time, Ethan said. Marcus studied the name. Then he let his son leave it there. Monday evening, Eastview's first row was full. Marcus, Ruth, Belle, Riverside employees, Eleanor with the pantry charter, and Vivian beside Gloria, learning to show up as a daughter. Ethan stepped to the lectern and saw his father before he opened his notes. His final argument said a community was not one strong rescuer, but people making need visible, sharing weight, and building rules that outlasted emergency. Marcus listened to every word. He stayed through the applause, then walked home beside Ethan without checking his phone. When Ethan finished, he did not look toward an empty chair. A good father can mistake carrying every burden for love, just as a frightened leader can mistake control for responsibility. Marcus learned that secret kindness still leaves shadows, and that sacrifice becomes harmful when it asks a child to keep losing the person making it. The Riverside List mattered, not because one man remembered every hungry neighbor, but because he finally placed it where many hands could hold it. Dignity is not refusing help. It is receiving help without surrendering your voice, then offering the same grace to someone else. Communities survive darkness when need is named without shame. Truth is spoken before pride hardens, and no hero is required to stand alone.